Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson here on Tuesday morning. And Brian, I don't know how much you follow the college football realignment world, but we now have sources saying Gonzaga will be joining the Pac-12 and
Ooh.
UTEP will be joining the Mountain West. I've got to ask, you watched UTEP earlier this year. We all watched UTEP earlier this year. Would you feel better about that game had Nebraska done it to a Mountain West team?
Yeah, that has to give you a few extra points, right? In the whatever discussion we're having about Nebraska. I don't know what that discussion is, but like if we're
I never know what that
we're talking about bowl maneuvering or the fact that they could go 11-1 and get to the playoff and how that UTEP game will impact things. But yeah, I think everybody would have a different lens on things if they're Mountain West variety.
I gotta say, if I was the Mountain West, I don't think UTEP would have been my first 8 phone calls. I don't understand. You have right there, you have South Dakota State, North Dakota State, you have USD, Idaho, Montana State. These are like all good football programs right now with good following of fan base. I just is it that difficult to get them to want to come up from the FCS level, and then you can pay it. The Mountain West has like a war chest that they can go out and buy these teams. I don't understand UTEP.
Maybe someone about my age is making the decisions who grew up with an affinity for the Sun Bowl, which used to be broadcast like on CBS.
It was a big CBS game. Yeah,
it might still be. I'm not sure. I should know that as a company guy, but it was definitely on CBS for a long time and in the middle of the day, which I really appreciated as a grade schooler. So maybe some weird connection like that has somebody just has the feels for UTEP and that town. I don't know. That's the best I got.
Well, and the Sun Bowl, when I was younger, always seemed like a kind of an exotic. Like there's something about El Paso that made it seem like it was exotic. And then you get older and you learn a little bit more about the history of El Paso and where it sits and all of that. But I always was like, hey, it'd be cool if Nebraska was in the Sun Bowl. And then they joined the Big Ten, and then the bowl ties completely change on it. But there for a moment there, I would have been completely okay with Nebraska going to the Sun Bowl. I still would be okay with Nebraska going to the Sun Bowl. I just don't think they can now.
Someone could fact check this, but it does feel like sometimes too the Sun Bowl would have like a really like known announcer who got the assignment of like it would be like Vern Lundquist or somebody, and it'd be like a game between a two 7-4 teams. Yeah. Usually UCLA was one of them. It felt like, and yeah, so I don't know. It was always kind of a fun game. So that's a lot to say of why I think the Mountain West is choosing UTEP. It's because of the Sun Bowl, obviously.
Just to finish up the Sun Bowl, I feel like Washington State played a lot of games in the Sun Bowl even before Mike Leach was there. Like it just feels like if they were good enough to make it to a bowl game, they were pretty much just being sent to El Paso to play like Purdue or somebody like that.
Maybe my brain is wrong on this, but I feel like Nebraska in 2008 was a Sun Bowl candidate. And then Alex Henry made the kick and they beat Colorado 40-31. They ended up getting picked by the Gator Bowl, which was better because you're on New Year's. But I felt like the Sun Bowl was in play, and I was a little bit excited about that. I thought it would be kind of fun, but Gator Bowl is all right too.
Yeah, 2008, who ended up playing in that game? It ended up being Oregon State and Pittsburgh. For that's number 24 Oregon State under Mike Riley that year. And Pittsburgh, I don't know if that would have been Dave Wannstedt or not. So it's an interesting combination there. All right, that's enough Sun Bowl talk. We can dive into some Nebraska football. I assume that's why people are here and that's why they're listening. And BC, let's just dump right into Matt Rhule. He had his usual Monday press conference. What I never prepare you for these things, so I apologize. But if you would, a couple takeaways from what Matt Rhule had to say on Monday after the Purdue game.
Yeah. So let's start with special teams because I know we'll get into running backs at some point. Obviously, the kicking game is that major concern point because you're in this league where you feel like you're going to be in these 3 to 7 point games every week. You can't trust the snap operation right now. John Hull's, got to be dealing with some mental hurdles after missing a couple. And even if the 2 missed kicks, the last 2 ones that were blocked weren't completely his fault because of the snap and the timing, you still have those registered to your name. So it's kind of difficult, to deal with that. Buschini did a heck of a job on those holds, by the way. I went back and watched it. It was actually impressive that he even got the ball down on both with a shot at it. But it changes the way you operate. But it was interesting because Rhule was, as a overview, I think he likes a lot of things that are happening on special teams. But you know how this works, Schaefer. If you have 2 main things that are just out of order, it sort of disrupts everything. Like Brian Buschini did have a really fine game on Saturday. When you look back, it was kind of funny as Rhule ran down like everything he did, including 2 tackles, getting the holds down, and had some good pooch punts and all that stuff. But it gets intercepted by the fact that this kicking game's in disarray. And I was asked this on the radio, but I think it's true. If you're going to try it on Saturday against Rutgers, I think it has to be a moment earlier in the game. And there might be some groans about it, but it's got to be like early second quarter, right? Where you kind of see where it's at, if it can work. And some people would say don't even give it another chance, but it can be tough if you find yourself in like 4th and 10, like Nebraska, or 4th and 12, like they were on one of the possessions, where you're sort of in a no man's land of your chances of converting it versus going for the kick. So I understood why they did it. But if Nebraska's 4th and 4 or less, I think you go with your guys who you feel are your best, players, and Dylan Ryle and those receivers.
I do think there's going to be a lot of value to Nebraska attempting field goals, because the only way through this is literally through it. I mean, so you're not just going to be able to practice it up, and someday at practice it's just all going to look perfect and then it'll translate into the game. John Hull's going to have to make the kicks with the people in the stands, and with the conditions, and with the opposing team trying to swat it down, and the snap's going to have to come in those conditions too. And so whenever that moment comes, and I think you're right, it's going to happen on Saturday. I do think there is going to be an inherent value in Matt Rhule putting him out there to just kick, because if he makes it and you can build upon it, I think that's the way forward. I have my concern with special teams. The kicking is its own side conversation. I want to know why they're not better as gunners on punt coverage. Like I don't think, like, we can celebrate what Brian Buschini did on Saturday, and he played well and he punted well and he did what was asked of him. I don't want to see my punter making tackles.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to see him, someone random was the one who ended up downing the ball. Like I don't know what your outside gunners have been doing all season, but it's been a struggle for them to be in position, not just to down punts, but to force other teams to fair catch it, or to tackle when they don't. And so, when we talk about Nebraska's special teams issues, the coverage unit on both punts and kickoffs has been, bad to straight poor at times this season. And to me, that's almost inexplicable, because you have so many options and so much talent at wide receiver and defensive back and linebacker. There should be no excuse to not be able to find a couple guys who can get down the field. Illinois just bullied them. I don't know if you remember watching that live, Brian, but Nebraska was like 15 yards away from the guy receiving the ball. And that wasn't even on the kick where it went the wrong direction. Like I think I look at that, and that's a part of special teams where that can get better throughout the course of the season, and I expect it to.
No, that's a good point. The first punt Buschini had, there's no way that shouldn't have been downed at the 2. Right. I mean, that was an excellent punt, and there was plenty of time, but the gunner, I think it might have been young Boodle on that one.
Yeah.
And he did get blocked into the back of the end zone on it. He tried to, scrap his way back to it, but it was too late by that point. So that was the best example to emphasize what you're talking about in that last game, because that should have been ball on the 2-yard line, like 98% of the time.
Yeah, and so, that's one of those things I'm going to watch kind of going forward. And again, you think to yourself, like, why are they so worked up about the gunner? It all works in conjunction. If you're giving away yards on special teams, you're making it harder for your offense and your defense going forward. And when you're as poor as Nebraska is on special teams, those yardage in Big Ten games is just going to get bigger, and it's going to make the task of winning harder. And so it might be a small thing, but it's something that I feel like Nebraska shouldn't be as poor at as they have been all year. So
he did bring up one thing, and I think he's right on that. This has been pretty good. They have gotten close to blocking some kicks.
Yeah.
And he was pointing out that even though they haven't had that wow moment where, some guy just stuffs it and you run it in, they should have the first week. It was Elliott Brown, maybe, who almost had it. But he does believe, and I'd have to go back and chart this, but it does feel like there's been some kicks from punters on the other side that have been rushed because they're trying to just get it off quick, and they've gone, out of bounds like 35 yards net sort of deal. And so that's been a positive. So I get it. He's, you're pumping up what's good, and you've got a lot of guys that are committed to special teams. Like, there's so many guys involved in it, and not everybody's doing a bad job. So you're trying to, like, keep the morale up. Like, this is good over here, this is good over there. But special teams is one of those deals where if one thing is way out of line, it doesn't matter if, like, 8 out of the 10 other jobs are really good. It's just like any play in the game. Like 10 guys could do the job excellent, but if you have a safety breakdown or whatever, it's going to still stand out as just a complete bust as your defense as a whole has to take it. And that's the way it goes with special teams.
You mentioned you wanted to start with special teams. Other thoughts that Matt Rhule press conference?
I think he just has a genuine respect for Schiano and like how he's a builder. You can kind of see where they would have mutual admiration for each other because they've kind of built programs in the past.
Two sides of the same coin a little bit there.
They very much are. And, Temple was a tough program to build up. And I think Rutgers is a program, like, I remember when I was a kid, Rutgers was a joke. I mean, they really were. And Schiano, his first time there, I'll never forget. He had him like in the top 5. Like, remember they were playing like on Thursday nights.
Yeah, that game against Louisville, there was a seminal moment of being a high school kid in those Thursday Big East games. I mean, that was fantastic. I remember watching with a buddy. They're playing Louisville, and I think Papa John Stadium, and that game was awesome. I mean, you had Michael Bush, and I think it was Brian Brom was the quarterback at that time for Louisville, and trying to think of who was playing for Rutgers.
Well, Rutgers had like Ray Rice at one point and some guys like that who were really good college players. But the job he did the first time was really good, and he had opportunities for some other jobs, and we don't have to get into why that didn't happen for him. But I think Rutgers was very fortunate to get him back for round 2. That doesn't always work out, but it felt like he's just meant to build that program up again. And right away, his first year or two, you could tell that he was putting the bricks in place. Like, they were becoming more formidable in the trenches. I remember they went to Michigan like a year or two ago and were giving them heck for like 3 quarters, and Michigan couldn't move the ball. And you're just kind of taking these things in the back of your mind. Like, that's going to be an outfit that they might always kind of be 7-5 or 8-4, but he's going to have them be one of those teams that you're going to have to fight in a phone booth when you play them to make sure you get out of there with the win. And I think that's what Nebraska's expecting this week.
Yeah, I always feel like the Greg Schiano Rutgers is the team that you feel it the next week. Like, you may have beat them, but you walk out of that game like you had to earn that win because they made you fight for every inch on the football field. I mean, that's just sort of the mentality that you draw up with Rutgers football. And I'm not surprised that Matt Rhule would be highly respectful of what Greg Schiano, and they did it in a lot of the same space. I mean, Matt Rhule is known out there in the Northeast, and when Greg Schiano was brought back by Rutgers, it was a huge deal for those coaches in New Jersey.
Yep, both have been in the NFL, so the similarities are obvious.
NFC South even.
Yep. So it's a lot of commonalities in this one. he also brought up or was asked about Ceyair Wright. Let's talk about him. I think Ceyair Wright has been excellent through his game in 3 quarters. Now I know there's a play here or there, but a perfect example is actually he said it himself. He should have had a pick probably on that 3rd quarter play, and he lost a tug of war. But it has felt like Ceyair Wright has been contesting everything. Like, I mean, he's tight in his coverage. He's playing with confidence. He's not afraid to be physical. He got dinged up a couple times, but kept coming back. Still played the most snaps of anybody on the defense with 52 snaps. So I think that's been really encouraging while Tommy Hill's trying to get right. You lose your top player draft-wise probably for this next cycle for at least a couple of games. And Ceyair's done a nice job of being that guy that they hoped when he arrived in midsummer. I never know what to make of those things anymore, Mike, when a guy comes in and like we've seen some guys who will pop up and do something, but others who don't do anything. And Ceyair Wright has just stuck with it, kind of bought into what John Butler and those guys are teaching him. And now he's out there, I think, playing with a lot of confidence. And that makes a defensive coordinator feel pretty good when he's got a player like that who's jumped right in.
Well, and then the other thing to kind of mention here with Wright is that the story about him from USC and the USC writers that I talked to just raved about what he was doing during fall camp. It just didn't translate over during the regular season. And they went to great lengths to say, hey, don't blame him. The defense he was playing in was terrible, and he was put in bad positions. So there was never a question about talent. One of the things that's remarkable watching him play, he breaks on the ball so quickly. Like when Hudson Card was coming his way, he had a really, really nice, the almost interception that turned into a reception was one thing. He had a really nice breakup where he didn't play through the back of the guy, never really gave the official an opportunity to give him a penalty, though we've seen that work against him this year already once. He just does a really nice job of breaking on that ball and then getting around the wide receiver. There's definitely some intuition in his game that, the coaching of Tony White and John Butler are going to be able to pull other aspects out. But there's some pieces of what he can do mentally that make him kind of a guy that these are deflections now. It wouldn't be shocking to see him jump a route or two as we go through the rest of Big Ten play.
I'm not saying at all he's going to be this player, but I told Brunson in the press box because of he's wearing the number 15 and he's kind of got the similar size. There's a little Alfonso Dennard that
I knew that's where you were going to go with it.
It does remind me a little bit of it just because Dennard had that like immediate, like same pluckiness to him. Like right away, it's like, I belong here. And I expect to match up with anybody. And so far, Ceyair's done that. Now, he's got a long ways to go to have as good a career as Alfonso did at Nebraska. But it might be the uniform. I'll give it that. But I definitely think he's played well his first couple of games. It's been a nice pick-me-up for this defense when one of your top guys is out.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying Alfonso Dennard's name there because he's one of those guys that really enjoyed watching that whole career at Nebraska. He was a lot of fun to watch and a really physical defensive back. One of Bo's best. I mean, in an era where there's a lot of really, really good corners. All right. I want to ask you about one player in specifics, and I'm pretty sure Rhule talked about him both after the game and again on Monday. I've been fairly impressed by what Gunnar Gottula has done in the short amount of time over the last couple of weeks at that left tackle spot. It hasn't been perfect, but it's been pretty good. And I think they get a matchup against Rutgers where they're not a particularly strong pass rushing team. So he gets to kind of feel his way into yet another game here. And you're going to look up after the bye week and you're going to have a guy in Gunnar Gottula that will have, basically almost 3 full games under his belt at that left tackle spot.
Yeah. And if you go back to last Saturday, pass pro was pretty good. Like I watched that game back.
A lot of time.
Dylan had all day on a few of those plays. And even in the first half, when they're driving it down to the 35, then meeting the force field, there was plenty of time, and Gunnar was not needing help. Like they weren't using anybody to chip. Purdue has a really good defender in Kydron Jenkins, who we had highlighted going into the game, and Rhule made a point that Purdue switched him from sort of his middle backer spot to more of an edge position. He's like, that's a clever move by them. We'll see how this goes. And they never had to get on the headset and say, hey, give Gunnar some help over there. That he was doing fine. And I think Rhule was really proud of that. And you heard him in the post game say, no one's asked about him yet. And that's a good thing, because if we were, it might have signaled that there was an issue there. So had to be a confidence booster for him the first start. But Gunnar's been a guy who even last year you would hear really positive things about sort of behind the scenes. And I just think he's another player who right away he enrolled early. He made the most of that spring. And he built up a nice runway into being in position to help out like he is right now.
Yep. I agree with all of that. And, the pass protection was really good on Saturday. I think it'll be good again against Rutgers. It makes it easier for Dylan Raiola to do his job. Let's talk running backs. Nebraska's running back situation changed a little bit on the depth chart. We're now back to 3 oars. I think we got up to 4 at the start of the season. We got down to 2. Now we're back to 3. The newest, not really new, but rejoining Orr company, Emmett Johnson, strong game against Purdue. We talked about it in the post-game podcast. What's the sense that you get? And we're gonna hear from Marcus Satterfield on Tuesday, so we'll be able to probably talk about this more in the Hypecast. What is the sense that you get though on how Nebraska wants to utilize this three-headed rushing attack?
Well, Rhule on Monday said he does like Dante Dowdell sort of giving that thump early on, and what that does to defenders as the game goes on, and then Emmett, kind of taking advantage of that. However, I didn't get the impression that, that doesn't mean they're not going to play him earlier this week. He did catch a pass and have a rush in the first half, but I think he had 2 touches on Saturday before halftime. And it definitely seemed like whatever discussion took place in the locker room, he was the first guy out there in the second half, and there was a concerted effort to get him the ball, and he made the most of it. I would like to see more of them. I know you would. You wrote about it. I think Dante brings some good things to the table too. I definitely think there's a place for both of them.
Yeah, I don't want Dante to just be put on a shelf and not used. I want to make that plain. I think everyone kind of agrees on that assessment.
Yeah, I think people are just sort of like really like every time Emmett gets the ball, it feels like good things kind of happen. There's that feeling in the fan base, even back to last year, like the most explosive plays in the running game have come from him. He's got really good vision, like on that 9-yard run down to the 10-yard line on the first drive they scored on, that he's going left. He sees it. He should have been 5 yards. He still fights through contact and gets 4 extra yards. He's a tough back too for his size. Like he runs bigger than his listing. And so all those things make me in the fan club to see him a little bit more. I just love what he's about too. Like one of those guys who, okay, I can sit over here for a half and still roll in and be ready. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah, well, I think it comes from the mentality of he's just used to people thinking he can't do something. So, whether he had to sit for a half and then he gets that opportunity, he's just going to maximize. I mean, that's just kind of the personality that he's presented from the moment that he was recruited by Ron Brown, of all people, back in 2021. So I am mostly curious, though. I think it puts a lot of pressure on EJ Barthel and Marcus Satterfield to figure out, like, all right, when is this the right moment for Emmett Johnson? When is this the right moment for Dante Dowdell? When is this the right moment for Rahmir Johnson? How do we make sure that they all get opportunities to do other things, though, so it's not that obvious what's going to happen if they're on the field? If Rahmir is the only one that you trust in pass protection, then it kind of gives it away when he's in the game. If Dowdell's the only guy that you trust in the goal line, or so they've got to be able to blend them. And I think that's where it gets a little bit difficult, because so far through, 17 games of his time at Nebraska, I think that's been a struggle for EJ Barthel to find which guy, when he wants to play him, how he wants to utilize him. Last year, Matt Rhule spoke of kind of the wide berth that he gives for those guys in terms of picking who's going to be out there. So, it's a lot of pressure for Barthel and then for Satterfield in terms of play calling. There's a lot that goes into it.
There's a lot that goes into it. And in a couple of these games, the snap count has been limited.
Yes.
And so you'd end up with like 57 snaps or whatever. And how do you distribute that? Like, it can be hard to get into a rhythm. And obviously along the way, you're feeding your wide receivers and it was good to see Thomas Fidone, I thought, like, had a nice second quarter. That's a different conversation, but you've got those guys to get the ball to as well. And so it's not a bad space to be in when you feel like you can go to like 7 or 8 different guys and you feel confident they can do something with the football. But it is another test that you have to take on as a coach. Like, how do I distribute this? And how do I know when to say, okay, we're switching around at this point, but now this guy has a rhythm and we're sticking with this. And we're going to feed this guy the ball for a few series without any interruption. So that's going to be, I think, key down the stretch here of this Big Ten season.
Do you think that they're let me restart that question. I didn't have it phrased how I wanted. How do you feel about how Nebraska has utilized Jacory Barney? Do you think there's another level that they can get to in how they utilize Jacory Barney?
Possibly, but I do like how it's building. Like, I mean, you got to think, like, 5 games into his career, like, this last game was the best example of utilizing him more and in the run game and all that. And obviously Purdue had put on film that if you could get on the perimeter on them, they have a lot of trouble with it. So it's smart to get Barney involved early. But yeah, I do think there's clever things you can do with him and maybe give him even a few more touches. He's just one of those guys who he feels right at home playing at this level. And not every guy is like that for their first season. Most aren't. So you got to really appreciate it when you see it. I said on our pod right afterward, it was halftime. He comes out, he's dancing around in the end zone. He's just like one of those guys, like, he's just easygoing and he expects to go make plays. And he's doing it at a high level. And he's tough. He's really tough. Like, he's taken some big hits, like, on a couple plays, and he just gets right back up and wants the ball again.
Yeah, I think Jacory Barney's a really exciting player. I don't know if you realize this on Saturday, but multiple players went over their 4-game allotment. There will be no red shirt for Jacory Barney, no red shirt for Dylan Raiola, no red shirt for Carter Nelson. Here's one for you. This kind of surprised me, even though I've watched all 5 games. I've seen them in all 5 games. No red shirt for Keona Davis.
Yeah. Yeah, they've went with Keona. Keona looks like a grown man. And if you're gonna redshirt Van Poppel, which was I'm sure a tough decision, you have to have someone that kind of steps up and takes some of those reps. And Keona is doing it. He was out there on like the second series. You had Mario Buford. Mario Buford is now like becoming a candidate who might blow through a red shirt. Willis McGahee, I think, is at 4 games maybe right now.
I think he might go over too. Vincent Shavers went over.
Yeah. So
they're playing more young guys than I actually thought they would early in the season.
You also don't know. Some guys might just want to play. There's some guys in their family, you don't know what the conversations are like. They might say, yeah, I'll play 10 snaps. Some guys don't expect to be here for 5 or 6 years. We always kind of act like that's how it's going to play out. But some, they're going to be here 3 or 4 years. So they're like, yeah, give me some reps. Let's do this.
I would say it's a good thing for Nebraska if they have multiple guys that are entertaining the idea of only being here for 3 years. So that's that to me is a good problem to have for a program that often hasn't had players in the draft, even if they've been, in the program for 5-6 years. So I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I should be clear. There's probably only like one guy that I necessarily would say 3 years right now, and you could probably guess who I think could be that.
Yes. I'll let the audience guess, so I won't give it away.
It's a tough one.
All right. Anything else we want to get to today as we kind of finish up our thoughts here on a Tuesday with the Husker 24/7 podcast? Anything we haven't touched on that you that you would like to discuss? Would you like to take a couple minutes to talk about how good John Bullock is?
It can.
You don't have to. You can just say he's really good, and I think everyone would understand.
I know how much you love PFF grades. He had a 92.4.
That's really good.
Yeah,
it's nice when the PFF grade lines up with the I grade.
Yeah,
because he looked amazing. He's looked amazing all year.
He's really good in coverage. Like, I mean, people can forget that it's like a former nickel. Like he has that in his background, and so it's really benefiting him. That's why his grades always are so high. But yeah, he does a little bit of everything pretty well. And Rhule had a funny line about everybody's talking about the takeaways. A lot of it's John taking the ball away, which is absolutely true. He had the pick 6, but he also had the assist on Tommy Hill's pick 6, more or less, and then the forced fumble last week. So it's been a heck of a season. And I've kind of forgot about this, but Bullock's touchdown was 35 yards, and it was 35 seconds after Alex Bullock had his block on 2 Boilermakers that freed Jacory Barney. So fun with numbers there.
Yeah, that's great. The Creighton Prep family up in Omaha has got to be fired up with what they saw on Saturday from those guys. I want to say this for anybody that's in the stadium, or for you, I'm sure you've noticed it, Brian. Pre-snap, John Bullock is moving a lot. Like, he is deciphering a lot of information. He's kind of fun to watch pre-snap because he's lining up in different ways. It's especially fun against Colorado because it felt like a bit of a cat and mouse game to try to hide him from Shedeur Sanders. And then he would be coming in on some of those blitzes or, spying or whatever it is that he was doing. He's one of those guys, if you're sitting in the stadium, you get a good vantage point of it, you're waiting for that play clock to run down, just let your eyes follow John Bullock a little bit and just see the different spots that he lines up and how they're utilizing him to kind of almost, I think, hide him in some ways from the quarterback, so then he can sneak up on him, whether on, pass rush or whether he's back there in coverage. So throwing that out there. Anything else you want to dive into?
We don't have to. I mean, the Micah Mazzccua thing,
let's touch on that at least briefly.
Yeah, I mean, he's on the team, was suspended for the Purdue game, and he's a backup, is what Matt Rhule said. Now, I would add this. We've said this on the podcast all off season, and I'm not saying someone's better than the other, but we did make it clear throughout the long runway into game action that there was a 3-way battle for the 2 spots. So, like going back to the spring, sometimes everyone would assume it was like Mazzccua and Evans, and I would say they like Latovsky too. Like they always had, Rhule was pretty clear about that. So it doesn't surprise me, especially if someone's not quite checking some boxes that they want, and I don't know what that's all about. I don't. But if they're not, and they feel pretty good about the other 2 guys, how they attack the day, it doesn't surprise me that that's where we stand at this moment.
Yeah, I anticipate they would like to move on from that conversation at some point too. And
it seemed like it. Yeah.
Not have it be a thing that's come up every week. But, well.
We do have it. Don't we have a guy? You could do a feature. This would not be a good feature to do, but you could do it on a guy who has come up every year. There's always like one guy who like gets brought up every week. Like, what's his status? Yeah. I mean, it happened with Omar a lot and stuff, but
there's sort of a truism there where the person has to be asked about a lot. Chances are they're not going to be as impactful as you built in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's probably held true if you go back and you think about that.
I do think 2 things can be true. Like, there's obvious interest in what the situation is because he started the first 2 games, and he does seem like a really talented football player. Like, he could get a lot done for you. And then there's sometimes the overreaction I think we do have a little bit around here with a certain player where maybe he's not playing, and it gets brought up like leading into kickoff a lot. You'll see it on your social media feed, like this is going to impact winning or losing. And maybe in a case or 2, it does. I don't know if that's the case here. But I think sometimes we can build up someone to be more valuable toward how the outcome is going to be than they actually are, or how the coaches see that at least.
Yeah. I agree with your assessment there. All right, Brian, I have nothing more for you. I have nothing more for the good listeners at Husker247. We invite those that are watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. We see you in the YouTube comments. We see those conversations we're having. We're not always able to respond or get the chance to respond, but we appreciate the community being built with the Husker247 YouTube page. So we appreciate you guys over there. We appreciate you, those listening on our podcast partners as well. Please subscribe and have that automatically downloaded to your listening device. Check out everything we got going on at Husker247. Brian and Brunts, plenty of coverage from the Purdue game, plenty of coverage leading up to this Rutgers game. Nebraska will have visitors on campus again on Saturday. We will see who some of those are. I anticipate there could be some interesting names that pop up for future classes as well, as this is one of the remaining home games. Nebraska only has 2 more home games after this one. Yeah. Kind of a weird schedule this year. So a lot going on. We'll have all the coverage for you at Husker247. For Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We appreciate your time. We'll catch you next time.